Hello viewers and welcome to yet another commentated match of Warhammer 40,000 Conquest. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm pleased to bring you an exceptionally special game indeed. This is going to be featuring Travis McDaniel as Zarathur High Sorcerer up against our recently crowned 2015 Dutch national champion Dan Jung, playing as Packmaster Kith. So if there's anyone in the world that's a quite proven to be competent, formidable Kith player, it's none other than our very own Dan here. But of course, Zarathur is quite competent playing up against Packmaster Kith. So in assessing both of these players' opening hands, we'll have to see that Travis does indeed keep his opening hand, whereas Dan takes a bit of a replacement. So we can just see a tremendous wealth of command icon laden units here in Dan's hand. 2 copies of the Incubus Warrior or Rogue Trader. He's got the double shield card Suffering, a copy of Foretell to cancel a battle ability, and 2 Kith's Chimera Masters, so an early game Chimera Den could just be an absolute nightmare for Travis here. But in assessing Travis's hand, looks like he's got the initiative token, by the way. The opening deploy of the game is going to be a copy of Ammo Depot, so he must count on depleting his hand quickly to draw an additional card as soon as he happens to have 3 or fewer. But quite a few powerful combat units of his own. He's got the Infernal Gateway, which is basically the Chaos equivalent of a drop pod assault. He could use that potentially in conjunction with this Zarathur's Flamers here just to deal out a tremendous amount of damage, and by being able to attack, by being able to sacrifice that to spread that damage between multiple targets, that could just be incredibly useful in depleting some of Dan's swarm here. We see a Kith's Chimera Masters touchdown on planet number 1. It of course generates a Chimera token, and we see a Splintered Path Acolyte put out to planet number 4. Something definitely interesting to see here is we have a Gleeful Plague Beast already for Zarathur, and that's potentially going to be able to just completely expunge and eradicate the board of any and all Chimera tokens here. So it's going to be up to Zarathur to try to avoid Packmaster Kith's resource choke and just kill off as many of those units as Zarathur can prior to their becoming a problem. But Dan puts out a copy of Rogue Trader to planet number 4. It's basically going to block this Splintered Path Acolyte, and now if the Acolyte ends up being sacrificed to deploy a demon unit for 2 reduced cost, that means that Dan all of a sudden is potentially going to be able to get that 2 resource bonus plus the Rogue Trader, so definitely not a bad play there. In assessing our opening layout of planets, planet number 1 is going to be Planum, which allows for movement, so that's critically important to see in the early game. It definitely rewards players for putting a very powerful unit at that planet. Planet number 2 is going to be Karnath, which triggers the battle ability of any other planet in play. Planet number 3 is going to be Barless, the random card discard planet. Planet number 4 is going to be Ossus 4, which steals 1 resource. Planet number 5 is going to be Yvarn, which we could potentially see triggered by Zarathur at some point, perhaps to get something along the lines of that Gleeful Plague Beast into play for free, just because Packmaster Kith definitely doesn't play anything more expensive than something along the lines of a Clavax War Leader or maybe Solarite of Vetus, and you definitely don't want to see the former put into play directly into your HQ, but you would not mind the latter Solarite. So, copy of Rotten Plague Bearers touches down to planet number 4. That's going to afford basically the opportunity for Zarathur to win command at that planet and exhaust it to deal 1 damage, killing off that Rogue Trader, whether or not there's a battle at that planet. So I think therefore it's unlikely that Zarathur is going to be sending himself to that planet unless that's some sort of feint or something like that. A little bit more pressure on Dan to use shields if he wants to save that Rogue Trader, but our players are rapidly running out of cards. That Ammo Depot is very soon to do a little bit of work for Zarathur, and of course as soon as he has a bit of a deploy stall, he's going to be able to run rampant in regard to command over Packmaster Kith. But Incubus Warrior to planet number 3, it's going to be 2 command icons entirely uncontested. That's potentially 2 cards on the line. We don't happen to see an Archon's Palace for Dan. So let's see what exactly he can do. He's got 2 resources left. That could be another copy of Chimera Masters. It could be another Incubus Warrior. And then Travis has got 3 resources. He could potentially do a Snakebite Thug to contest planet number 1. He could do a copy of Zarathur's Flamers. He's got the initiative token, so the Flamers could potentially do just a ton of work for him. And in assessing victory conditions, it looks like like. We could potentially see a victory condition as early as planet number 4 through green strongpoint icons, or we could also see a victory at planet number 5 through blue technology icons, and there's not enough red material icons in play at the moment to win the game. But both of these are just top-tier players. If I haven't mentioned it before, this is going to be a top 8 match for Sam Mann's Warhammer 40k Conquest Octagon Wa Online Competitive League, and whomsoever reigns victorious in this match is going to advance to the top 4. So let's see what is next to come from our players. Travis exhausts his Rotten Plague Bearers during the deploy phase. That's going to consume an action for him. I'd actually forgotten that this does occur during the deploy phase. So the Rogue Trader is all of a sudden threatened with taking 1 point of damage. Dan decides to allow it to be destroyed. He chooses not to use Foretell. He does not get rid of his copy of Suffering. So that's basically going to allow Zarathur is still winning at that planet, and that's 1 fewer unit for Travis to have to deal with. We see a copy of the Incubus Warrior now played out to that planet. It's going to be basically free from being molested by that Rotten Plague Bearers that's already exhausted. Since Travis was already now losing command at that planet, why not sacrifice that Splintered Path Acolyte? Sounds like a good plan to me. And he plays out a copy of the Gleeful Plague Beast to planet number 1. So that means if Kith goes to that planet, she'll indeed generate a Chimera token, but she'll be taking damage. Those tokens will be taking damage. Kith's Chimera Masters is going to be taking damage. That could potentially allow Zarathur to win at the first planet without actually sending himself to that planet. It's definitely going to be a ton of pressure on Dan to be spending a lot of shield cards that he may not ultimately have in regard to trying to save this Chimera and deal as much damage to that Plague Beast as possible. He's got no resources going into command, so perhaps he'll draw an Archon's Terror to get rid of that Plague Beast, maybe a Clavax War Leader, but I think he's going to find himself between a little bit of a rock and a hard place in regard to balancing card draw and incoming resources, saving up for either of those effects. But looks like Kith ends up going to planet number 2. That's going to be able to trigger her the battle ability of any other planet in play. It also allows her freedom to trigger this copy of Foretell here, should she choose to do so. Zarathur went to planet number 4, so he's going to be able to win command at the planet opposite that Incubus Warrior. Going to be a grand total of 3 cards, 1 resource for Diazra. Dan, that's going to be a Warlock Destructor, a copy of the Clavax War Leader, but note, Dan only has 1 resource, so the Clavax War Leader is normally great. I'm sure that Gleeful Plague Beast is going to be able to deal some damage to itself, making it a great target for the War Leader, but unless Dan wants to basically save everything he's got, that's not going to work out great for him. But the Warlock Destructor is just a bit of great early game pressure here. Contrarily, we saw 0 cards and 2 resources for Dan. Battle is going to erupt at the first planet. We can already see that Gleeful Plague Beast's reaction has procced. It killed off the Chimera token. The Kith's Chimera Masters has taken a point of damage. The Gleeful Plague Beast has dealt itself a point of damage. This Infernal Gateway is basically going to allow Zarathur the opportunity to dump a unit into play as need be to get an attack. And that could be the Zarathur's Flamers to do an attack plus a sacrifice. Seeing as how the Infernal Gateway necessitates you sacrifice that unit at the end of the phase anyway, that's just a fantastic 1-2 punch there. And that Orcish Snakebite Thug is a great answer or counterpart to that Warlock Destructor. So it looks as though at the present moment Travis is down to 3 cards in hand. He's got this Ammo Depot as of yet unused. I hope he remembers to use that effect, because he's going to need everything he can get working in his favor to try to beat the Dutch national champion here, Dan. Looks like combat closes at the first planet. That Kith's Chimera Masters was destroyed without exhausting, and that means that's going to be Planum triggered. But are we going to see that Foretell or not? The Gleeful Plague Beast is going to be able to potentially just reposition itself where... Okay, so good. We see that Ammo Depot triggered. That's going to be another copy of Zarathur's Flamers. So now I'm very curious, is that Gleeful Plague Beast going to potentially go to Packmaster Kith's planet, only for us to see the Zarathur's Flamers drop into play and potentially take a big swing at Packmaster Kith? Okay, so we see Foretell. So it is triggered. That means Packmaster Kith Kith is going to be exhausted, and that means the Gleeful Plague Beast is basically going to have to stay at planet number 1, and that is in turn going to mean that the Gleeful Plague Beast there is brought to the HQ. But we definitely could have seen the Plague Beast, basically get off a potential swing at Kith, maybe even trigger another battle ability, and then that Infernal Gateway could have just been absolutely incredible. So that did not quite work out, but we are going to see a battle at Karnath entirely uncontested. Is it going to be stealing a resource or doing a random card discard? What is it exactly going to be? It looks as though there was a little bit of a question in the chat window that's just worth mentioning. Do warlords still get initiative during combat if the warlord is exhausted? And the answer is indeed yes. So, like Dan points out, only relevant for commands. So which of these battle abilities are we going to see? We could see Planum, relocate a unit. That doesn't seem tremendously useful. There's the Forced Discard, there's a Steal a Resource, and then there's Yavvarn, which seems like it would be a pretty poor life choice indeed to activate. So is it going to be Card Choking or Resource Starving? From Dan here. He himself only has one resource, so I could definitely see him stealing a resource, especially considering the presence of this ammo depot. It seems like it would be a little bit of a time to try to choke cards, and indeed we do see Ossus 4 as the chosen trigger, so that means Travis is going to be down to 1 resource, 4 cards, relative to Dan's 2 resources and 6 cards, but there's still one battle yet to take place. We could see Zarathur potentially take a swing. Interestingly, this Incubus Warrior it's got a 2 shield icon card that we could potentially see used to spare its life, and indeed we do, and this is immediately going to pose a problem because it's either going to be Zarathur doing something like this Infernal Gateway to drop a Zarathur's Flamers into play to sacrifice it to kill off the Incubus Warrior, or otherwise that's potentially going to be 2 points of damage if we see the Infernal Gateway used as shields onto Zarathur here, but Travis indicates he's pondering an action, so are we going to see the Infernal Gateway drop Zarathur's Flamers into play? It's either you take 2 points of damage and you save the Flamers in your hand, or, in any case, that's just kind of a rotten decision he has to make here. So, looks like we're indeed going to have Zarathur take 3 points of damage, and why that's just so incredibly important is as soon as Zarathur is bloodied, so much of his utility is gone, and the instant we see something along the lines of a Chimera Den interplay here, that's going to be a fantastic opportunity to bloody, if not eventually assassinate Zarathur. So that's quite the dangerous little bit of a blow there. Looks like the Incubus Warrior retreated at the end of the combat round, so it's going to return to the HQ. That's going to afford Zarathur the opportunity to steal back that resource that Dan took from him, and now we're going to bounce into our HQ phase. That's going to be 4 resources and 2 cards, so let's see what exactly our players are going to draw here. Both players indicate that they have no additional actions, and as we see our HQ phase come and go, it's going to be a Promise of Glory, so 2 cultist tokens for free for Zarathur. That's going to be enough resources to put a Zarathur's Flamers into play. We saw another Snakebite Thug, which could be fantastic for pressuring those planets that Travis is going to need to win the game, potentially Barlas, potentially Ossus 4, so just a wealth of really nasty units there. He's got those 2 Thugs, he's got 2 Zarathur's Flamers, he can basically cheat one of them into play, and he can Infernal Gateway one of them into play, so here's hoping for his sake he draws a tremendous amount of shield cards, because look at this nasty business that Dan drew. God damn. He ended up with a copy of the signature support, the Chimera Den, as well as an Archon's Terror, so we do indeed see that Promise of Glory interplay. We see a Rogue Trader put down on planet number 5. Our new planet number 5 happens to be Eloith. It's the tutor the top 3 cards of your deck for any 1 card that you'd like, card, and then rearrange the remaining 2 on the bottom of your deck in whatever order you would like. But Void Pirate goes out to planet number 4, and now Zarathur is going to be faced with a few difficult decisions here. He ends up putting a Snakebite Thug into play at the very first planet, opposite a single Chimera token that Packmaster Kith had generated the previous turn. So Dan's down to 3 resources, 5 cards. Travis has 4 resources, 4 cards. What's interesting is that the Gleeful Plague Beast is going to have an opportunity to proc its 1 global point of damage at the onset of the combat phase prior to the opportunity to Archon's Terror that unit. We see another copy of the Kith's Chimera Masters, and what's going to be incredibly nasty is this Chimera Den is going to be able to activate itself during the command phase prior to the opportunity for the Gleeful Plague Beast to potentially kill off those Chimera. So that's going to be a potentially fantastic defensive card there, so that Chimera Masters is at planet number 1, a fantastic bit of economy there for Dan, and Zarathur is definitely going to be fighting a little bit of an uphill battle here. It's a damn shame that Zarathur's Rotten Plague Bears don't have any option to, basically blast something. And we see that signature support hit the table, so let's keep a careful look on that. That is just absolutely disgusting artwork, but fantastic all the same. Yes, looks like Packmaster Dan has played his Chimera Dan, so absolutely fantastic to see that for Kith's sake. It looks as though Ammo Depot triggers to draw a copy of Warp Storm, which could potentially be absolutely fantastic if the Gleeful Plague Beast doesn't afford Zarathur the opportunity to kill off all those Chimera tokens. A timely Warp Storm could very well be, critically decisive in determining the outcome of the game. And keep in mind, there's 2 Chimera tokens in play already. Packmaster Kith is going to be able to potentially put another, she's going to be able to put another Chimera token into play as soon as she graces any target planet with her presence. And then considering Zarathur's already sitting at 3 points of damage, that's going to make it absolutely trivial for Zarathur to potentially be bloodied, and consider also that the initiative token is in Dan's hand, so that's incredibly dangerous. We see those cultists both sacrificed, triggering their interrupt there to put out a copy of Zarathur's Flamers basically for free to planet number 1. I can only imagine that Zarathur might be trying to win that planet without sending his Warlord there, just because that's two rather beefy units. But what exactly is he going to do? Is he going to drop his Gleeful Plague Beast off at planet number 2? Let's see. Both of our players are deciding where exactly to send their Warlords for Kith. I could see her really going to, I suppose, potentially any planet would be decent. Barless would be... I guess I'm not really sure where Kith is going to go, but Zarathur ends up going to planet number 1, and Kith ends up going to planet number 3 to win all the more resources for her, and I suppose just, again, trying to resource starve Travis, just because if she can block off those 2 resource tokens associated with Ossus 4, if she can also do the steal a resource, that's going to be fantastic for her. So at the beginning of combat, that's going to potentially be the Gleeful Plague Beast here dealing out a point of damage to all of these present units of Zarathur's. It looks as though Travis is only going to get 1 card and 1 resource, and I definitely can't quite say the same for Dan. That's going to be a grand total of 4 cards and 3 resources for him. Interestingly, although it's very expensive, we see a copy of Inquisitor Caius Roth, so he can force his opposition to discard down to 4 cards in hand if able. That's looking pretty decent because Travis Dan actually has 7 cards in hand right now, so we indeed do see action at the end of the command phase. The Chimera Den is going to strategically relocate these Chimera. Where exactly are they going to go? Let's hope that they indeed go to planet number 3 and we can see a Warp Storm. Ha ha! So not a bad play by any means, if only Dan knew what he was potentially walking into. So let's see here, the Chimera Den. Is he going to move all of those tokens? Come on, Dan, let's see it. Alrighty here. Looks as though he's actually picked planet number 5, so that's a little bit of a shame. Perhaps he's just trying to deposit them at a planet where it's as strategically, it's as inoffensive as possible to have a Warp Storm blow up that planet. We end up seeing, again during the command phase, the Rotten Plague Bearers exhausts to take a pot shot at the Incubus Warrior prior to it having basically just been destroyed, and we see a copy of the 2 shield cards Suffering discarded to spare the Incubus Warrior from being destroyed. So we're going to go into battle here at the first planet. We can see that the Gleeful Plague Beast has already started assigning damage. The Kith's Chimera Masters is going to be outright destroyed. The Plague Beast deals itself a damage, deals Zarathur damage, as well as the Snakebite Thug and Zarathur's Flamers. Zarathur's Flamers, it's not that big of a deal. Looks like definitely Zarathur is just doing that first planet bully thing, so I'm just deadly curious to see how exactly things are going to work out for him. He may well attempt to get his opponent to overcommit in regard to swarming a planet, potentially bloodying Zarathur with mere myriad Chimera tokens or something along those lines, perhaps with a bunch of just, dangerous Dark Eldar units, and then deploy that Warp Storm to try to kill off as much of Dan's army in one fell swoop as is possible. But it looks as though Karnath is going to be captured by Zarathur. He decided to trigger Ossus 4 with that effect. That's going to be a resource stealing ability, so that means Dan is currently down to 2 resources. That's still more than enough to do, well, it's exactly enough to play an Archon's Terror, and Travis is sitting at 4 resources, although that's going to be changing shortly as soon as Kith wins at this planet. So the Rotten Plague Bears end up exhausted. We could potentially see an Infernal Gateway, mean that Zarathur's Flamers enters play. We do actually see an Infernal Gateway, so color me a little bit surprised, but Zarathur's Flamers is gonna... Okay, so that's interesting there. Looks like the Infernal Gateway puts the Flamers into play, and we immediately see that copy of Archon's Terror put out to basically route the Zarathur's Flamers. So that's going to be basically sacrificed at the end of the phase, is how that functions. And now we see a Warp Storm played right now to destroy the 3 Chimera and the Rogue Trader at planet number 5. So I'm perhaps a little bit surprised we didn't see that used until later. And with no shields whatsoever in hand, it seems as though Dan basically had to just take all of that damage there, so he couldn't have saved any of those units. They are all gone. And now we're going to see that Zarathur's Flamers destroyed. Of course, Ossus 4 is going to trigger, and that's going to be well, it would have been a 1 resource swing, but Travis decided to use all of his resources there to play out that copy of Warp Storm, so that may have had a lot to do with when he decided to play that. So now it's just 1 card in hand for Travis, 5 cards in hand for Dan, no resources for either player. So now it's going to be a new HQ phase. Our new planet is going to be Iridial, which is normally a highly desirable destination when you've got a Zarathur with 4 points of damage on him. But considering that Zarathur's got to drop off this giant train full of units, I can't imagine that... he's going to be sending himself to the 5th planet. So we saw that copy of Zarathur's Flamers being discarded, and now that's going to be just an interesting choice here. So Dan got a copy of the unique Archon's Palace. It's another just incredible, well, not signature support, but it's an incredible unique support, which could allow him to just resource starve, card choke our Zarathur player. We see another copy of Ammo Depot, which could potentially just be a fantastic amount of card draw. We've got another copy of Zarathur's Flamers, which could be great in allowing him to tie command. But we actually see, as his first deploy action, not a bad play by any means, a copy of Inquisitor Caius Roth played out to the 1st planet, so he's immediately going to tie command with the Incubus Warrior. It's a 3/5 unit, which is a fantastic target for the Clavex War Leader, especially considering that Gleeful Plague Beast is going to be damaging anything and everything. But consider also that, oh man, Dan has got 7 cards in hand, so he's got to start discarding some things. Looks like he's going to choose to discard Archon's Palace, a Bloodied Reavers, and what else is he going to get rid of? He's got to make the choice between one of 2 copies of Clavex War Leader, Bloodied Reavers, Slith Mercenary, and Warlock Destructors. So does he want hard-hitting combat units, or does he want to get rid of another economy unit? Totally up to him. I'll let him make the choice since he's the recently crowned Dutch champion. So 2 cards down, 1 to go. We see another copy of the Bloodied Reavers gone, so let's hope for Dan's sake he can end up with a wealth of resources to play these Clavex War Leaders, and let's hope for Zarathur's sake he's going to be able to win at Barlas and Ossus 4 to try to overcome his enemy before he's ultimately killed, because Zarathur's Flamers are in jeopardy of being killed by the Gleeful Plague Beast. All of these units are already damaged, and therefore they're all eligible targets for that Gleeful Plague Beast. So we see a copy of Warlock Destructor put out to planet number 1. We see Ammo Depot trigger. That's going to be another copy of Ammo Depot drawn for Travis. Definitely not exactly what he wanted to see. I'd imagine he'd have been much preferring anything with shields or perhaps an Infernal Gateway. So it's going to be up to Zarathur here. I think if he wants to have any hope of winning, he's either going to have to go to planet number 1, potentially planet number 2, but things are looking pretty grim. And things are looking pretty good for Packmaster Kith here. We see that copy of the Slith Mercenaries put out to planet number 3, and that's going to afford Kith the opportunity to starve Travis of 1 additional resource and immediately trump him in regard to command. And of course, Travis doesn't have near enough resources to steal control of the Slith Mercenaries there. So we're about to go into the command phase. Is Travis going to go press planet number 1, or is he going to go to planet number 2? In regard to just victories here, economy, like income, it's looking like Dan is potentially going to pull in 3 resources, which is going to be enough to ensure that he can play a Clavex Warleader. So for that reason, we might see Travis go to planet number 2 to try to beat the Incubus Warrior there in command, but we could also see Packmaster Kith go to planet number 2 just to make sure that that doesn't happen, and certainly the Incubus Warrior and Inquisitor Chaos Roth can make short work. The Incubus Warrior and the Warlock Destructor can make short work of the Inquisitor, even without the assistance of a Clavex Warleader, despite Travis having initiative. So things are looking a little bit dangerous here for Zarathur. How is he going to try to pilot his way to victory? Does he have any hope of overcoming Packmaster Kith? Zarathur should normally be a little bit favored in this matchup. I believe Zarathur, out of all the Warlords, has the most preferential matchup versus Kith. So let's see here. Travis indeed decides to go to planet number 2. Kith instead opts for planet number 3, I guess just to afford herself the opportunity to benefit from that Void Pirate and potentially to kill off the Snakebite Thug. So what exactly are we going to see? We see a Chimera token, of course, generated at planet number 3. Zarathur is going to be able to win command at planet number 2. So what, if anything, can Zarathur do to potentially win at planet number 1? That Gleeful Plague Beast is potentially going to kill off the Zarathur's Flamers, so he'll have to sacrifice it to get rid of the Incubus Warrior because he doesn't have any shield cards. So that's just definitely a difficult position that he finds himself in. Zarathur is going to be at 5 points of damage since he doesn't have any shield, but it's Travis is going to win 2 resources. And then it looks as though Dan got 3 cards and 1 resource. He got another copy of another copy of Archon's Palace, a Warlock Destructor, and a 3rd copy of Kith's Chimera Masters. We indeed see that Zarathur's Flamers sacrificed prior to entering the command phase when it's going to be destroyed by the Gleeful Plague Beast. No shields whatsoever for Travis means Zarathur's going to be at 5, Gleeful Plague Beast will be at 3, Snakebite Thug itself will be at 2, and Dan has got 2 resources. He's going to have enough for a Clavex Warleader and a Kith's Chimera Masters or the Archon's Palace next turn, or if he's lucky and draws something along the lines of an Archon's Terror, that's going to be really nasty. And over the course of this game, we've seen, despite this ammo depot, Dan has drawn 7 more cards than has Zarathur. But battle is going to erupt at planet number 1. Dan does not have a sufficient number of resources to play the Clavex Warleader, but there's no shielding opportunity to spare the Inquisitor, so it looks as though the Inquisitor could kill the Incubus Warrior, then it'll take 3 points of damage, then it'll deal damage to the Warlock Destructor, but it itself will ultimately be destroyed. So if Zarathur had any hope of winning this game, I think he'd have had to win the battle at the first planet here, and frankly, I just do not see how that would be possible. So Inquisitor Chaos Roth does indeed take a swing, kills off that Incubus Warrior. Now it's going to be the Warlock Destructor's opportunity to damage the Inquisitor, and unless Dan decides to retreat, he's going to be able to win the combat at that planet. If Travis would have drawn something like an Infernal Gateway, that would have changed everything, but he was not so fortunate as to do so. Looks like Dan is asking if there's any action, and of course, Travis is probably going to indicate yeah, he's done. But even if he had a Infernal Gateway or something along those lines, I think he'd have still waited. So that's going to be 3 points of damage to the Inquisitor. Are we going to see either player retreat? I can only imagine that Travis is going to kind of press the initiative token and not retreat. Unless Dan makes the mistake of retreating, this battle is going to be his. And then we're going to see Zarathur have the opportunity to steal a resource. So Travis indicates he is indeed going to stay. What are we going to see from Dan? Is Dan going to run, or is he going to fight? Dan says he's going to stay, of course. So that means the Inquisitor is going to take its final swing of the match at that Warlock Destructor, and that's going to be 3 points of damage dealt out to the Destructor, and now the Destructor is going to kill off Inquisitor Chaos Roth, and that's going to be 1 random card discarded. Let's hope, for Zarathur's sake, that it at least happens to be an ammo depot, the least egregious of any of these options, because the loss of that Zarathur's Flamer could just be incredibly disappointing, but at this point it's going to be very much an uphill battle indeed. I suppose Zarathur is no longer going to be able to win through those green strongpoint icons, so he could potentially try to win at Yvonne, but there's already a daunting bit of opposition showing up at that planet. So Inquisitor Chaos Roth is destroyed, and that puts our Dark Eldar player in a very favorable position indeed. So let's see that random discard. Sir Travis, what exactly are we going to get rid of? It was indeed the small mercy of the loss of a second copy of Ammo Depot, so that leaves 1 left. The Warlock Destructor is going to return to Dan's HQ. I'll be very curious as to whether or not he invests a resource into sparing its life during the upcoming turn's deploy phase. So Ossus 4 is going to basically allow Zarathur the opportunity to steal 1 resource from Dan. It's going to basically shift Travis up to 3 resources and Dan down to 1 resource, but during the following round's turn, he'll still have plenty for the Clavex War Leader there. So our soon-to-be planet number 2, current planet number 3, Yvonne, it's looking like that poor Snakebite Thug is going to be obliterated, but it'll have at least some opportunity to deal out damage. So Zarathur, of course, retreats. The Plague Beast and the Snakebite Thug are going to stay at that planet, so they're nearly going to be destroyed next turn, but we could just easily see Dan decide to skip sending any units to that planet and just basically allow this gleeful Plague Beast to kill itself off. But the battle does erupt at our current planet number 3. It's going to be a Chimera token dealing 2 points of damage to the Snakebite Thug. And what exactly is the Snakebite Thug going to kill? Is it going to kill a Chimera token or a Slith Mercenary? It's actually just going to deal damage to Packmaster Kith. So let's see. Dan does not have any shields at all, so that's going to be 3 points of damage dealt out to the Packmaster. Perhaps Travis is hoping against hope that he draws another copy of Warp Storm or something like that. Perhaps he's completely relying upon luck at this point, and it's going to be up to, I suppose, just Travis to try to lock down Yvonne here. It's not only his victory condition through blue technology icons, but it's also the victory condition for Dan. Because, well, if Dan happens to win at Ossus 4, let me change what I was saying there. So, definitely Dan will want to block off Yvonne, and then we'll kind of see what happens here. He may well kind of outlast Zarathur, and especially considering Zarathur has got 5 points of damage. I would not be surprised next turn to see Zarathur go to Iridial, but then the initiative token is going to be in the hands of Packmaster Kith. So Kith could go to Iridial herself, heal away some of that damage from her, and in any case just put a fantastic amount of pressure on Zarathur. And again, need I say it, as soon as Zarathur is bloodied, things are going to start looking very dangerous for him indeed. But we see our HQ phase. It's going to be 4 resources and 2 cards for each of our players. That means Promise of Glory and Rotten Plague Bearers for Travis. So perhaps not the best effects to see, but Promise of Glory basically allows him to get one of these demons into play for free, and thanks to 1 or more copies of Ammo Depot, he might end up drawing something a little bit better than what he's currently got. Looks like our new cards were another 2 shield icon card for Packmaster Kith and a Bloodied Reavers. So just another glut of fantastic combat units here. We see another copy of Kith's Chimera Masters. I believe this is number 4, put out to our current planet number 3. That's going to be another Chimera entering play for, use with that den. We see an Ammo Depot from Zarathur, and now he can basically just deploy stall by using, say, Promise of Glory, by using those Ammo Depots. So Dan is basically going to have the be forced to playing out the remainder of his hand here, but seeing as how he's still got 3 resources, I'm not tremendously certain we'll see much else from Dan here. So what do we see? We see a Warlock Destructor. We see the existing Warlock Destructor is indeed in play. I'm curious as to whether or not Dan paid that resource for the Warlock Destructor. Let me actually check. Alright, so it looks as though that Warlock Destructor's in play at planet number 1, and now we see the copy of Promise of Glory. So Promise of Glory is going to generate 2 cultist tokens into Zarathur's HQ, and that's now going to allow him the opportunity to basically just pay for either one of these little Chaos Demons in hand. So that could be the Rotten Plague Bearers, it could be the Zarathur's Flamers. The Noise Marine Zealots that he just drew are not actually a demon, but they're pretty powerful. If they're at the same planet as Kith, they're going to be a 4/3. We see a copy of Orc Cannon, which is great so long as Zarathur remains unbloodied. And now we see the Noise Marine Zealots touch down on planet number 1, Rotten Plague Bearers to planet number 2, and Zarathur's Flamers to planet number 2. So it's looking like Travis is going to probably try to win planet number 1 just to try to fuel his victory condition there. And then I guess no matter what, he's going to go to Yavvarn as well. So I'm a little bit curious as to this heavy deployment here at planet number 1. Perhaps he's just hoping that the Noise Marine Zealots will be a sufficient bit of discouragement to keep Kith from going to that planet. But I suppose let's see how things go. So Diazra indicates he did not pay for his Warlock Destructor. So the Warlock Destructor from the HQ is destroyed. Just wanted to make sure that absolutely everything was, you know, by the by and completely legit there. If either of these players win, ideally it would be without any mistakes. So let's see how things break down. Both players are deciding where to commit their warlords. Will we see Zarathur go to planet number 4? Will we see Kith go to planet number 4 using her initiative to try to block off Zarathur? Zarathur doesn't have any shields in hand, and Dan knows that full well because Travis has 0 cards, so that's going to be 1 resource and 5 cards for Dan, and a whole lot of nothing for Travis. But he does have this Orc Cannon, so it's going to be planet number 2 for Travis. So I guess he's going to try to deal out as much damage as possible with Zarathur. We see planet number 1 for Packmaster Kith, so an interesting choice. We see a Chimera generated, of course, at planet number 1. And then in regard to income, it's going to be 1 resource here for Travis at planet number 2, and this is going to be no shield icons whatsoever. So this is going to be pretty dangerous. Looks like Dan is only going to get 2 resources himself. That Void Pirate was quite handily blocked. Dan is going to have the initiative at the first planet. The Noise Marine Zealots are going to take a point of damage, and even if they didn't, the Warlock Destructor would be able to kill them off. But we could potentially see Packmaster Kith being bloodied if it wasn't for the existence of this copy of Suffering here. So it looks like we ended up seeing the Rotten Plague Bearers exhaust itself to destroy the copy of the Chimera token at planet number 2, so it's 1 fewer target for the den. Oh, and Eloith was not targeted, so that's going to be 2 additional, oh my god, 2 additional cards for Dan. So one of our spectators happened to remind Dan that he didn't actually collect his bonus there. And that's definitely going to change things a little bit because now Dan has a copy of Archon's Terror he can rely on. He's got a Pact of the Homunculi to do like a random card discard for his opponent. And of course, both of those cards have associated shield values, which are just incredibly useful. So a little bit of a potty mouth there from Dan in our chat log, but just a wealth of different events here. So we're going to see the onset of the combat phase here. That's going to be the Gleeful Plague Beast dealing out 1 point of damage to each present unit. It looks like Zarathur's already considered his units. Looks like Kith is going to take a point of damage. We see a Pact of the Homunculi to block that point of damage dealt out to the Chimera token, and the Warlock Destructor is going to take a single point of damage. So the initiative token is going to be in Kith's hands. I can only imagine we'll see this Noise Marine Zealots completely obliterated from the face of the planet, but the Plague Beast will still get to attack. The Snakebite Thug is still going to get to attack. That is, if we don't see the Archon's Terror remove the Gleeful Plague Beast, which may not be a bad move because it's going to threaten the immediate bloodying and removal of Zarathur from a planet. So that could be an incredibly nasty little bit of a punch there. So, are we going to see that combat action? It's going to be up to Dan. He's got to make that decision. If I were Dan, I would probably use Archon's Terror to get rid of this Gleeful Plague Beast, and then, yeah, potentially bloody Zarathur during the next round, potentially just kill the Plague Beast and just make things incredibly complicated for our Zarathur player. But Dan himself has got his Packmaster with two hit points remaining. He's got that Warlock Destructor. Looks like we see a Chimera token take a swing to kill off that Noise Marine Zealots. That's definitely efficient there, so the Zealots are going to be destroyed. There's nothing that Travis can do against that. I suppose if I were Travis, I'd have my Plague Beast attack, I suppose, Kith, but we'll see a copy of Suffering used as shields to prevent her from being bloodied. I can only imagine. Yeah, it looks like the Gleeful Plague Beast is going to be taking a swing at Kith once Dan indicates he has no additional actions. So we see that copy of Suffering discarded. That means Kith is going to be at 1 hit point remaining. Now it's going to be the Warlock Destructor's opportunity to kill off that Snakebite Thug, whether or not we see Archon's Terror. I suppose Dan is just going to kill off these units using initiative in his favor and relying upon his opponent's inability to shield. So the Warlock Destructor ends up taking a swing, killing off the copy of Snakebite Thug, and I suppose I forgot about this Orc Cannon there, but that's going to be 1 damage dealt to the Plague Beast, and now it's going to be up to Dan to decide where the point of damage goes for that Orc Cannon, so it's going to be on that copy of Warlock Destructor. Bit of a shame that he didn't have to decide between using a shield icon or otherwise losing his Chimera or potentially bloodying his Warlord there. So we see Dan capture Ossus 4. We see our resource total shift slightly. Travis is going to be down to 0, and Dan is up to 1. So at present, still no resources, no cards for Travis, 4 resources, 5 cards for Dan. He's now got 2 green strongpoint icons, and if Dan can manage to win the game at Yvvarn, that'll be it for him. So whichever player wins the battle at Yvvarn during the next turn, that's going to be the game. Kith and Zarathur are both so incredibly damaged that it's definitely going to be a bit of an uphill battle in regard to either of those units could be very, very easily removed from play, and because Zarathur is potentially going to be able to use his ability to kind of enhance like the Rotten Plague Bears and the Zarathur's Flamers prior to going into combat, that could potentially just be an incredible opportunity for him to deal out some significant damage. But Dan is going to have an Archon's Terror. He's going to have at least enough resources for, well, if he wants to save them, both copies of his Clavex War Leader, and those, whether or not they kill a unit, they interplay as 3/3 attackers. So we see a copy of the Slith Mercenaries destroyed by these Zarathur's Flamers, and now it's going to be Dan attacking with the Void Pirate, and now what exactly are we going to see? Is Zarathur going to retreat, or is he going to stay at the planet? If he retreats, we could, well, if he does not retreat, let me change that. We could see the Chimera Den shift over. We could see a bloodying of Zarathur. So he's basically got to retreat, and then we could well see these Clavex War Leaders, one of those dropped into play just to ambush Zarathur and result in a bloodying. So things are looking pretty grim indeed for Travis. So Travis is currently thinking, does he want to retreat or does he not? The correct answer, I think, is yes, but the problem is no matter what he does, things are looking very, 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 very difficult for him. We end up seeing Travis exhaust with Zarathur, so the lesser of 2 evils here, and now let's see this Chimera Den punish these exhausted units. So we're going to see an action move and exhausted. Okay, so yeah, both Chimera tokens are actually going to be going to Yvvarn, and that means that the Zarathur's Flamers can't sacrifice themselves just to kill off all the present enemy army units, so that's definitely a bit difficult for Zarathur. One of them is going to have the opportunity to attack. It looks like Travis is going to sacrifice his copy of Zarathur's Flamers in order to do an action of his own, and that Chimera, there's no way that it's going to be saved. The initiative was indeed in the hands of Zarathur. I forget if Kith was present at that planet or not, but I suppose at the present moment, okay, this makes my life easier. Archon's Terror just immediately routs the Rotten Plague Bearers, and that means that Yvonne could trigger, and I suppose, seeing as how Travis has no cards in hand, we might actually see Yvonne triggered just to get a copy of Bloodied Reavers into play. But what exactly are we going to see? I guess Dan chooses not to trigger. Okay, he does decide to trigger, so very well played, I believe, on part of Dan. No cards in hand for Zarathur, so that's a free Bloodied Reavers. I definitely wouldn't say no myself. And it's all going to be up to what exactly are our players going to be able to put out to our new, soon-to-be first planet here, Yvonne. Travis is going to be entirely at the mercy of what he draws, so we see our headquarters phase come and go rather abruptly, and all he has to win the battle at this planet is going to be 2 copies of the Rotten Plague Bearers, unless these ammo depots can do some work for him. But we get a copy of Tzeentch's Firestorm. That's a nice thing to see, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to be enough to win the game for him, and we've got a 3 shield icon card and a 2 shield icon card for Packmaster Kith. So that is incredibly frustrating to see. Looks like Dan's got to make the decision whether or not he wants to spare his Warlock's life. Once again, our thankful spectator calls that out for him. So it looks like Dan indeed pays for the Warlock Destructor there. Now it's going to be his opportunity to play out some units. So Tzeentch's Firestorm, Orc Cannon, and Rotten Plague Bearers. So Zarathur is certainly going to be able to front load a lot of damage at the first planet with the Firestorm, with 2 Orc Cannons, with these Rotten Plague Bearers. But is Kith going to be able to pull through? She's got a tremendous amount of shielding ability. She's got the ability to do at least a Clavex War Leader. Granted, none of the enemy units are damaged at the moment, but it still ambushes into play and deals out some damage. And there's a lot of Dark Eldar units that are going to be, basically exhausted during the first combat round, but then they're going to be ready to attack. This Chimera Den is going to be... Well, I suppose it's not really useful at this point. I can only imagine Kith herself is going to go to the first planet just to generate a token there, just to serve as another basically 2-1 attacker. So it's all going to come down to this. What exactly are we going to see from Dan? It looks as though he actually changed his mind to get rid of the Warlock Destructor, so that's a little bit of a shame that that didn't happen at the very onset of the deploy phase, since I guess Zarathur hadn't really done anything other than trigger an ammo depot. But okay, so Dan decides to outright pass. I guess he's relying on these shield cards and his Clavex War Leaders. I suppose it's not going to be possible, even if he were to win every resource available on the board, for Dan to basically get enough resources for another copy of Clavex War Leader, but things could work out as to be as nasty as an additional Archon's Terror for Dan. So only a Tzeentch's Firestorm in Zarathur's hands, yet 2 copies of Orc Cannon. We saw Rotten Plague Bearers played out to planet number 1, and we saw Rogue Trader put out to planet number 3, so this could be a bit of income here for our Chaos player, and he definitely needs it. So it's going to be both Warlords going to planet number 1. There's going to be a Bloodied Reavers showing up exhausted. And let's see what exactly our players draw. It looks like planet number 1 is going to be tied. It's going to be 1 resource and 1 card for Zarathur. What is Zarathur going to get? He had better hope that it's going to be something good. Potentially like a 2 shield icon card, maybe something along the lines of... whatever, like Slaanesh, Temptation of Slaanesh, Slaanesh's Temptation, but it's a Chaos Fanatic, so that's not going to do him any good at all. Instead, we see 2 cards drawn for Dan, and that's going to be a Warlock Destructor and a 1 shield card, the Pact of the Homunculi, which is a deploy action, so that's only any good as a shield card at this point. And now it's going to be up to Zarathur to use that Tzeentch's Firestorm in a very timely sense up against just a tremendous amount of enemy units here. And I suppose, what exactly are we going to see? I'm sure Travis is facing a little bit of a difficult proposition, but all he's got to do is kill off all these enemy units and be left with at least something of his own. So he indicates a command action. The Rotten Plague Bearers is going to threaten 2 points of damage dealt out to this Chimera. Keep in mind the initiative is going to be in Zarathur's hands. We see a copy of Raid discarded as shields, and that's only going to be a 1 shield and a 3 shield card left. So let's see here. Tzeentch's Firestorm is at an action speed. We could see that prior to command. We could also see these Orc Cannons used at any point. So with these Orc Cannons, so long as Zarathur's present at the planet and not gone or not bloodied, they're going to be potentially 2 damage onto an enemy unit. So I suppose Dan should be thankful that he's got as many shield cards as he can. And it's going to be very difficult for Travis to have any hope of winning this one. But what exactly are we going to see? It's a damn shame that Zarathur is going to be very quickly bloodied, I believe, just because as soon as he takes a single point of damage, that means these Rotten Plague Bearers are going to be far less threatening. But what exactly are we going to see? These Orc Cannons are going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on Dan. Looks like combat is perhaps about to break out. Will we see the Orc Cannons trigger? He could certainly distribute 1 point of damage onto each of these Rotten Plague Bearers, and then he could do a Tzeentch's Firestorm to potentially kill off whatever is left. So let's see how things break down. This is definitely an incredibly close game, no matter which player ends up ultimately winning here. Looks like both players have no actions. We see Zarathur exhaust to take a swing. What? Okay, so it's going to be a copy of a ready Chimera token. We see the Agonizer of Bren used as shields. So it looks like definitely Zarathur's in jeopardy of being destroyed here. We could see 1 damage to each of these Rotten Plague Bearers thanks to the Orc Cannon, or I suppose no matter what happens, we could see a Clavex Warleader ambushed into play and to destroy one of the wounded Rotten Plague Bearers before a second Orc Cannon has the option to attack. It looks like the Chimera token is jumping the gun there, trying to get off an attack on Zarathur, but Travis is indicating that he's thinking for a moment about action. So his actions are the Orc Cannon, and of course he also happens to have the Tzeentch's Firestorm as an option. So what are we going to see? Let's see, an Orc Cannon exhausts. Are we going to see the Clavex Warleader interplay and very much punish this effect? We see one of those Rotten Plague Bearers damaged, and it looks like that copy of Void Pirate's going to be assigned 2 points of damage. That's definitely a little bit of a shame there. Looks like Travis is going to have to decide, is there going to be any action taking place? Okay, so Dan indicates no action, and whether or not that was a mistake, I'm not exactly sure, but Orc Cannon we see triggered again. That is quite intelligently, I believe, going to be the wounded copy of Rotten Plague Bearers leaving place. That punishes Dan for not taking advantage of that opportunity to dump a Clavex Warleader into play, and that's going to be 2 damage assigned to any one of these units, and this Pact of the Homunculi means that the Bloodied Reavers, which is indeed assigned that point of damage, is going to survive, and that is going to make life hell for Zarathur here. So all he's got left is a copy of the Tzeentch's Firestorm with which to deal out 2 potential points of damage, so it looks as though everything has been in vain at this point. We do see that Tzeentch's Firestorm played out once Dan indicates, and there we go. So we get the GG called out. The Tzeentch's Firestorm is going to manage to successfully destroy that Chimera, but that means Kith could have bloodied Zarathur. Zarathur would have been kicked out of that planet. We could have seen the Clavex Warleader touchdown, kill off that Rotten Plague Bearers, and that would have been the game going to Dan Jung, once again the recently crowned 2015 Dutch national champions. So absolutely fantastic play by both of these players. Zarathur was not able to win the day, but GG, well played to Packmaster Kith. Incredible play by both of our players. And of course, congratulations to Dan for winning, but thank you to Travis and Dan alike for allowing me to record this game today. So fantastic play. Once again, thank you to our players. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, if you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, you're encouraged to share this content, as the more eyes there are on these videos, the more subscription my channel receives, the more likely people are to stumble upon this content, be exposed to Conquest, potentially try the game, join our community, and of course, we all together continue to send the message to Fantasy Flight Games to continue to develop for this fantastic product. If at any point you'd like to get in touch with me, you're encouraged to do so through Facebook or on Twitter, perhaps to have me spectate, commentate, and record a game of your own, and if at any point you feel so inclined to send me some live-action gameplay footage of your own, I'd be absolutely honored to host and commentate that footage for you on my channel. If it just so happens happens that you're interested in supporting the Hive Tyrant, I'd encourage you to check out my Patreon. But once again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.